Hello guys, welcome back to narsicloud.com. So far we covered a lot of concepts in AWS. We started with AWS account creation, and then we talked about AWS regions and availability zones within the region, and how resources can be created within AWS. For example, we talked about EC2 missions, which is Elastic Compute Cloud, which is what's named after EC2 missions. And then we talked about security groups, how you're gonna secure your resources within the cloud. And then in the last video we concluded with VPCs, which is a virtual private cloud. We talked about very few basics about VPC. So today we'll quickly dive into the documentation, and then we will create one EC2 machine and within the VPC, and how security groups can be attached and detached from EC2 machine. So in our last video we talked about VPC and also EC2 Classic and EC2 VPC. So we mentioned that EC2 Classic, you can, once you attach security group to the machine, you cannot modify that. You cannot reattach different security group to EC2 Classic. So that's where we ended up our last video, saying that there is a other way that you could attach and detach security groups to EC2 machines through VPC. So let's dive into the documentation. We quickly talk about a few concepts before we go ahead and create EC2 machine within the VPC. Excuse me. So there is a tons of documentation in AWS, so we'll quickly go through the basics. So here they're talking about VPC and subnet basics, right? So if you look at this picture, every time any diagram you see, you imagine the diagram in such a way that you have the overall AWS area, which is the first rectangle, and then the inner rectangle is what we call it as VPC. So VPC is virtual private network that is provided to you, that is associated to your account. So let's say I created my account and I can create VPCs within my account. So those VPCs are specific to those accounts. So what do you mean by virtual private cloud? So like I mentioned in the past videos, AWS itself is a bunch of machines. It's a ocean of machines. So whatever the resources that you create, they're gonna end up on one of those machines. It's a shared network. So I mean, behind the scenes it's a shared network, but when you create virtual private cloud, that is specific to your account, and nobody can come into that VPC. It's only you. So here in this diagram, if you see, this is the AWS area, and within the AWS we created VPC section. So if you look into the zones, so this is one region. So like I mentioned, there are lots of regions in AWS. For example, US East, US West, and then EU, covering Europe. So they covered all parts of the world. So here let's consider one of the regions, and within the region you got availability zones, right? These concepts we covered in our past videos. Within the region you will have different availability zones to so that you can create your resources spanning across availability zones. For example, if one of the machines is down in one availability zone, then the traffic can be routed to other availability zones. So to maintain high availability, that's where we use availability zones. So coming back to VPC, so if you see, VPC is spanning across availability zones. So that means once you create a VPC in a region, you can use that VPC across availability zones. So let's say you have in your region you have availability zone A, availability zone B. Then you create one VPC, which is VPC 1. The name of VPC is VPC 1. And when you create any resources within the VPC, within the availability zone A, then you can attach those resources to the same VPC. You don't have to create multiple VPCs per zone. It spans across the zones. So that is the VPC. So what they say about VPC: virtual private cloud is a virtual network dedicated to your AWS account. So like I mentioned, it is specific to your account. It's dedicated to your account. And it's logically isolated from other virtual networks in the AWS cloud. So likewise, we have within AWS we can have many VPCs. So let's assume that this is your account, and likewise we will have other accounts created by other people, and they can create their own VPCs. So those are all isolated from each other. They cannot get into each other's network. So that's why we call it as a private cloud, which is your own cloud, tied to that's tied to your account, right? So whenever you create a VPC, you specify the IP address range, which we call it as a CIDR block. CIDR block itself is a network concept, other network concept. So you could look into the documentation, or in the later videos I can explain what is CIDR block, and when it comes to network internals, right? For now, let's assume that that's IP address range. So what that means is, for every VPC, whenever you create a VPC, you specify the CIDR block. That means you will give a range to that VPC, so that any machines that's going to be created within that VPC will have IP address within that range. What that means, let me give you this basic diagram. So let's say this is VPC. So VPC 1, I'm giving the name VPC 1, and within the VPC, I tell you that I'm gonna give this VPC IP address range. For example, it could be 10.0.0.0/16, right? For now, don't worry too much about what's this IP address and what's this format. Let's assume that there is one range. So still, to keep it simple, let's not even talk about these IP addresses. Let's say I will give 1 to 20 range. So what that means is, any resources that's going to be created within this VPC can be given any address that's between this range, that's within this range. So let's say I'm gonna create one machine here and then another machine here. I can give the IP address of 2 for this machine, and then 10 for this machine, right? So you cannot give something like 21, which is outside of this range. You cannot even assign those IP address to this machine. So that is the concept of the IP address range within the VPC. So what you're saying is, whenever you create a VPC, you give it the range of IP addresses that you could associate your resources within this VPC. So what that means, you can assign any of these the addresses to these machines. So that is the basic concept of VPC. That's how you create VPCs, and use that within the cloud. So the next concept, go to the documentation. So here you're specifying the address range as 10.0.0.0/16, right? What that means is any machines that is going to be created here within this VPC can be given the IP address that's falling within the range of this CIDR block. And for every VPC there is the route table attached. We'll talk about what is route table in our next videos. So for this video, let's focus only on VPC and the subnets, and how we can create resources within the VPC. So the next concept is subnet. What is subnet, right? So we said that VPC is a isolated network. It is a logically separated network, right? So within the VPC, you will have subnet concept. So what the subnet means is, so let's clear this off. So we have we created VPC with this range 1 to 20, and when you're creating the resources within the VPC, we always create them in one of the subnets. So subnets is again isolated areas within the VPC. So this is subnet 1. Let's say we create subnet 2, right? We give it name subnet 1, subnet 2. So we can create our machines here. This is machine 1, machine 2 within this subnet, right? You can create like that. So what we're saying is, within the VPC, create my resource in this subnet. What is subnet? Subnet is a subset of is the subset of this IP address range. Got it? For VPC, for this VPC, I gave a range of 1 to 20, right? The subnet will fall from, let's say, 1 to 10. I can give a subset of range, the primary range, and then here I can give 20. What that means is, any machine that you associate within the subnet can be given the IP address range that falls within 1 to 10. So this can be given 1, this can be given 10 or 9, whatever that falls between 1 to 10. And here you're giving 20 here, 15 here, and if you create one more machine, you can give you can give 16. So I'm just taking these machines as an example. That could be anything, any other resource. For example, there can be database, that can be any other resources. For example, anything that is any resource that is associated to be using network, right? That's falling in within, that's going to be attached to the network and needs IP address. So any resource. So in this case, I just took an example of EC2 machine, right? So this is called the subnet. So whatever the range that you give for VPC, within that range you give some IP addresses to subnet 1 and the rest of it to subnet 2, and likewise we will have subnet 3, subnet 4. You can have a number of subnets. There is a limit on that, but we could look into the documentation what's the maximum number of subnets that you can associate within the VPC. So from that concept, if you look into this diagram, see, for this VPC we gave the IP address range here 10.0.0/16 IPv4 format, and the below one is the IPv6 format. I will explain what is IPv4 and IPv6 in our network internals. So here it has three subnets: subnet 1, subnet 2, and subnet 3. These are all private subnets, right? What is private subnet means? So private subnet means it is the subnet. It is not connected to the internet, to which is not connected to the outside world. No machine from outside world can talk to the machines within these private subnets. That's why we call it as a private. These subnets can be communicated directly from within the VPC, but not from outside the VPC. That's why we call it as a private subnet. And there is a concept called private subnet and public subnet. Private subnet means the subnet that is not connected to the outside world. There is no clear channel to the subnet from the outside world. From the outside world. So we call that as a private subnet. What is public subnet? Public subnet means it is connected to the outside world through internet gateway. So what is internet gateway? We'll get to that later. So let's assume that internet gateway is a way that lets the traffic go in and out from outside to the cloud. So so in this case, it doesn't have internet gateway there, but I can draw that for you here. So let's go here. So let's see subnet 1 and subnet 2, and assume that this is internet gateway. This is one of the resources, one of the services in AWS under network. So if you attach this to this internet gateway, then this guy knows how to talk to outside cloud. So this is a public network, right? This is internet. This is the public internet. So since this subnet 2 is attached to the public network internet gateway, then we call this as a public network, public subnet, and this subnet is called private subnet. So why we need different kinds of subnets like private subnet and public subnet? What's the use of those? So we will get to those details when we get into creating databases, spinning up web applications, how web application talks to the internet and routes the traffic to your database instances. So I'll quickly give you a scenario where we use this public subnet and private subnet, right? So let's call this as a public subnet, right? So let's assume this is our database instance. And here let's assume this is our web tier, which is let's assume we have these two machines within this web tier, and traffic. So we don't want our database instances to be communicated directly from the public internet. We don't want any communication to happen from the internet directly. Right? So if we draw here like this, we don't want any communication to happen from public public internet to our database instances. We want our database instances to be private. These can be communicated directly from this subnet, but not from the internet. That's why we call it as a private subnet, right? We're not attaching any internet communication to happen to these database instances. So database itself is very important concept, right? That's very critical. That's where we store all of our company data, application data, all kinds of data we store in there. We want to keep it very secure, right? That's why we call it as that's why we create those database instances within the private subnets. What is private subnet? The subnet which is not having any way to communicate to internet through any kinds of devices like internet gateway. So just to summarize in one line, the subnet which is not attached to the internet gateway, we call that subnet as private subnet, right? So in this scenario, we want this web application to talk to our databases from the internet, right? So we deployed our web application into one of these instances, and it's taking the traffic from the internet. The traffic is coming here. User requested resource from this web application, and this web application has to talk to the database to retrieve the application to retrieve the data. Since we know these are the only two machines, this one and this one, two machines can talk to these database instances. No other machine from anywhere else, not even from this subnet, can talk to this database instance. We can configure the rules in such a way that only these two machine IP addresses can communicate to this database instance. It is that secure. We can secure to that level. So all we are doing is we're we're taking the traffic from the public internet to this web tier, and then we're making the requests to this database, because this database instance trusted these two machines, right? So that's why we have a concept called private and public subnets. Any resource that you create within this subnet, they are bound to talk to the internet, because this subnet itself is attached to the internet gateway, right? So that is the basic concept of subnet. Yeah. So now you understand, right? Within the VPC you have subnets, and each subnet has its own IP address range. And for VPC itself, you start with one IP address range. For example, in this case 1 to 20, and subnet for subnet 1 we give 1 to 10 IP address range, and for subnet 2 we give 11 to 20 IP address range. So if we connect that concept to the diagram here, so here we start with VPC IP address range, and then we have two subnets created here, and then subnet we give this IP address range 17.128.0.17, which is falling within this CIDR block. And any resources that you create within this subnets will be given the IP address within this range. And we talked about what is public and private subnet. Public subnet means which is attached to the internet gateway. That means it has clear communication, can happen from the outside internet world. So the private subnet means which is not connected to the internet gateway. We call them as private subnets. So usually we use private subnets where we can create a database instances where we want to have secure resources to be created, where we want to avoid any internet communication is to happen directly to those resources. Those kind of resources we create in private subnet. And then I think that's all to start with the basics of subnet. In our next video, we're gonna create a real resource, for example EC2 machine within the VPC, and how we can attach how we can create that in one of the subnets, and how we can attach security groups to the subnet, and how we can configure the rules and all that we'll talk about in our next video. And stay tuned, guys. If you like this video, please click on like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe, and you'll get to see a lot more videos like this. And I'll continue to make videos on AWS and on other technologies as well, and I'm here to help you guys on your job, and on your to I'm gonna help you to understand the technology itself. So stay tuned, and I'll meet you in next video. Thank you. Bye.